Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something that does not get said nearly enough. The moment a person stops abandoning themselves for love, everything changes. Everything. The energy changes. The posture changes. The way they walk into a room changes. The way they answer a text changes. The way they hold silence changes. The way they look at confusion changes. The way they look at disrespect changes. The way they look at their own heart changes. And if you have ever loved deeply, if you have ever overextended, overexplained, overfunctioned, overgave, overcarried, and overcompensated in the name of love, then you know exactly what I mean. You know what it feels like to keep reaching, to keep hoping, to keep trying to speak clearly enough, love well enough, forgive long enough, bend far enough, and stay soft enough that maybe, just maybe, this person will finally meet you where you've been standing all along. You know what it is to confuse loyalty with self-erasure. You know what it is to call survival love. You know what it is to stay in places that keep wounding you, because a part of you still believes that if you just try harder, it will turn around. But hear me now. There comes a moment in a person's life when they get tired of performing devotion for people who only know how to receive it, not return it. There comes a moment when the soul says enough, not in anger, not in revenge, not in drama, but in truth. And truth has a sound to it. Sometimes truth sounds like a door closing. Sometimes truth sounds like, I'm no longer available for this. Sometimes truth sounds like tears in private and peace in public. And sometimes truth sounds like silence. Now let's be clear, because I want to say this carefully. Silence is not always weakness. Distance is not always punishment. Detachment is not always cruelty. Sometimes detachment is what healing sounds like when the heart finally gets honest. Sometimes detachment is the sacred moment when you stop trying to convince somebody to care. Sometimes detachment is the moment you realize that your love is not supposed to be a place where someone comes to hide from accountability. And that right there, that is not cold. That is wisdom. That is self-respect with a pulse. Because for some of you, the deepest heartbreak was not that someone disappointed you. The deepest heartbreak was realizing how long you kept disappointing yourself to keep the connection alive. That's the grief nobody talks about enough. We talk about losing them. We talk about missing them. We talk about the betrayal, the confusion, the letdown. But we do not talk enough about what it feels like to wake up and realize, I have been leaving myself in pieces all over this relationship. We do not talk enough about what it feels like to hear your own voice become smaller, to watch your own needs become negotiable, to feel your own nervous system living in constant anticipation. Will they text? Will they call? Will they change? Will today be good? Will tonight be another argument? Will I finally be chosen the way I have been choosing them? That kind of love doesn't just break your heart. It exhausts your body. It confuses your mind. It teaches your spirit to brace instead of breathe. And a lot of people don't need another explanation. They need permission. Permission to stop. Permission to step back. Permission to admit that what they called love has also been draining them. Permission to stop calling chaos chemistry. Permission to stop calling inconsistency passion. Permission to stop calling anxiety intuition. Because not everything intense is intimate. Not everything familiar is healthy. Not everything difficult is deep. Sometimes it's just painful. Sometimes it's just misaligned. Sometimes it's just the wrong place trying to teach you the right lesson. And the lesson is this. You cannot heal while begging to be handled with care by someone who benefits from your confusion. Let me say that again for the people in the back, and maybe for the people whose hearts are still trying to negotiate with what already hurt them. You cannot heal while begging to be handled with care by someone who benefits from your confusion. You cannot rest in a place where you are always proving. You cannot bloom in a place where you are always shrinking. You cannot build trust with yourself while constantly overriding what your body already knows. And your body knows. Your body knows when you are not safe. Your body knows when your yes is really a fear-based maybe. Your body knows when you are smiling, but your chest is tight. Your body knows when you say, it's fine, but your spirit is tired. Your body knows when you are staying out of love and when you are staying out of fear. And for many of us, healing begins not when the relationship ends, but when the denial ends. That's the real beginning. The beginning is not always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's a long exhale. Sometimes it's sitting on the edge of your bed and finally admitting, this is hurting me. Sometimes it's realizing, I have been more committed to potential than reality. Sometimes it's understanding, I have been trying to earn what should have been offered freely. That awakening is sacred. Painful, yes, but sacred. Because once you see clearly, you cannot unsee. Once your soul wakes up, it becomes harder and harder to go back to sleep. Once you know that you deserve peace, chaos starts losing its glamour. And this is where detachment enters, not as punishment, not as a performance, but as a return to yourself, a return to your center, a return to your values, a return to your dignity, a return to your own name after being called only by what you could do for somebody else. Detachment says, I will no longer audition for a role in my own life. I will no longer set myself on fire to prove I'm warm. I will no longer confuse being needed with being loved. I will no longer make a home out of almost. That kind of detachment changes people. Because when someone is used to your constant accessibility, your constant reassurance, your constant overgiving, and then one day you stop overextending, not to manipulate them, but because you're finally honoring yourself. They feel it. Of course they do. They feel the absence of your labor. They feel the absence of your emotional management. They feel the absence of your softness cushioning their inconsistency. They feel the absence of being able to reach for you whenever they want comfort without offering commitment, honesty, or care in return. And a lot of times, that's when people become restless. Not because they suddenly learned how to love deeply. Sometimes it's simpler than that. Sometimes they are finally feeling the weight of what they took for granted. And that is a hard truth. Many people do not recognize value while it is quietly holding them. They recognize it when it is no longer absorbing their chaos. They recognize it when the texts stop coming, when the explanations stop coming, when the emotional labor stops coming, when the benefit of the doubt dries up, when the access changes, when the energy shifts, when they realize the person they thought would always stay has finally started staying with themselves. Now listen to me carefully. That shift is not about making someone miss you. That shift is about making sure you do not keep missing yourself. Because some of you have spent years trying to be unforgettable to people who are teaching you to forget your own worth. And enough is enough. You do not need to become harder to become whole. You do not need to become cruel to become clear. You do not need to become bitter to have boundaries. You just need to become honest. Honest about what hurts. Honest about what you've tolerated. Honest about what this connection is costing you. Honest about the version of you that keeps settling because loneliness feels less frightening than loss. And let's talk about loneliness for a moment. Because that's real. Yeah. That's where a lot of people get stuck. Sometimes people don't stay because the love is healthy. They stay because the absence feels terrifying. They stay because silence at home feels louder than disappointment in company. They stay because at least inconsistency is still contact. They stay because they've built so much of their identity around being chosen that being alone feels like being erased. But being alone is not the same thing as being abandoned. And solitude is not punishment. Sometimes solitude is the first room where the truth can finally speak without interruption. Sometimes solitude is where your nervous system gets to unclench. Sometimes solitude is where your appetite returns. Sometimes solitude is where sleep comes back. Sometimes solitude is where your laughter stops sounding forced. Sometimes solitude is where you remember what you liked before your life became centered around someone else's moods, availability, and mixed signals. And yes, in the beginning, solitude can feel like withdrawal, because let's tell the truth. When you have been bonded to inconsistency, peace can feel unfamiliar. When you have been bonded to chaos, calm can feel boring. When you have been bonded to hot and cold attention, steadiness can feel suspicious. That does not mean peace is wrong. It means your body has learned survival too well. Healing, then, is not just about letting someone go. Healing is about teaching your body that it no longer has to live on alert. It's teaching your shoulders they can drop. It's teaching your chest it can soften. It's teaching your jaw it does not have to stay tight. It's teaching your mind that not every silence means danger. It's teaching your heart that love should not require constant hypervigilance. That kind of healing is holy work, and it is slow work. Because once you detach, you don't just grieve the person. You grieve the future you imagined. You grieve the version of them you kept hoping would arrive. You grieve the effort you invested. You grieve the years. You grieve the words you believed. You grieve the moments that were real and the moments that only felt real because you needed them to mean something. And grief is not clean. Grief is not linear. Grief is not elegant. Grief is not always wise sounding. Sometimes grief sounds like, I know this was hurting me, but I still miss them. Sometimes grief sounds like, I know I did the right thing, but I hate how empty it feels. Sometimes grief sounds like, I am angry that I love this hard. Sometimes grief sounds like, I thought healing would make me feel stronger by now. And if that's where you are, hear me. There is nothing weak about grieving what you had to release to save your life. Nothing. Grief is not proof you made the wrong choice. Often grief is proof that the choice mattered. So let yourself grieve. Let yourself mourn. Let yourself be honest about what was beautiful and what was harmful. You do not have to turn every memory into poison just to move on. You do not have to deny the love to tell the truth about the damage. Maturity means you can hold both. You can say, I love deeply, and it was not enough to make it healthy. You can say, I saw goodness in them, and that goodness did not excuse the ways I was harmed. You can say, I miss what we had, and I will not go back to what broke me. That is growth. That is wholeness. That is emotional courage. Now here is where the work gets even deeper. Once you detach, once you stop chasing, once you stop overfunctioning, once you stop performing emotional labor for someone unwilling to meet you, there comes another question. If I am no longer pouring all of that energy into them, where does it go? And that, my friends, is where your life begins to come back. It goes into your sleep. It goes into your friendships. It goes into your body. It goes into your prayer. It goes into your joy. It goes into your creativity. It goes into your work. It goes into your boundaries. It goes into your laughter. It goes into the parts of you that were running on fumes while you were busy trying to keep a one-sided dynamic alive. You begin to redirect your devotion, and that is powerful. Because a lot of us know how to be committed to other people, but we have not yet learned how to be committed to our own healing. We know how to show up for them, but do we know how to show up for ourselves? Do we know how to keep promises to ourselves? Do we know how to rest before we collapse? Do we know how to stop explaining our boundaries? Do we know how to trust our no? Do we know how to leave at the first clear sign of contempt instead of the 50th? Do we know how to believe our bodies before we believe someone's potential? That is self-trust. And self-trust is built in tiny sacred moments. Every time you tell yourself the truth. Every time you do not text back just because loneliness is loud. Every time you let the wave pass without returning to what harmed you. Every time you stop checking who has not checked for you. Every time you choose a quiet night of dignity over one more conversation that leaves you depleted. Every time you honor your boundary even when nobody applauds it. Every time you say, this hurts, but I'm still not going back. That is how self-trust grows. Not in grand speeches, in repetition, in practice, in private. In the brave little moments when no one is watching but you. And that matters, because when self-trust returns, desperation starts to leave. You stop needing closure from people who were never committed to clarity. You stop needing apologies from people who still do not understand the impact of what they did. You stop needing to be chosen by someone who cannot even choose honesty with themselves. And once desperation leaves, discernment arrives. Now you see differently. Now you hear differently. Now you notice what you once excused. Now you recognize the cost of almost. Now you understand that chemistry without character is chaos. Now you understand that attraction without safety is not intimacy. Now you understand that attention is not the same thing as care. That clarity changes who gets access to you. And let's talk about access, because too many of us have been taught to make ourselves endlessly available and call it love. No, access is earned. Your inner world is not public property. Your softness is not a community resource for irresponsible people. Your empathy is not a free pass. Your forgiveness is not a revolving door. Your vulnerability is not something people are entitled to just because they desire proximity. The healthiest people on earth know how to love and how to limit. They know how to care and how to say no. They know how to stay open without staying unprotected. That is what boundaries are. Boundaries are not walls to keep love out. They are doors with locks. They are wisdom. They are structure. They are stewardship. A boundary says, you may not speak to me that way. You may not disappear and reappear as though my heart is a waiting room. You may not keep receiving intimacy from me while refusing responsibility. You may not keep benefiting from my compassion while dismissing my pain. You may not keep calling me difficult because I finally became clear. And listen, the people who were most comfortable with your lack of boundaries will often have the strongest reaction when you create them. That does not mean the boundary is wrong. It usually means the boundary is working, because boundaries expose who was relating to you with reverence and who was relating to you with convenience. That truth can be painful, but it is freeing. And freedom has a look to it. Freedom looks like no longer narrating your worth to people committed to misunderstanding you. Freedom looks like no longer over-explaining your exit. Freedom looks like saying less and meaning more. Freedom looks like being unavailable for dynamics that ask you to betray yourself. Freedom looks like peace that no longer needs permission. Now, I want to say something tenderly to those of you who are strong on the outside and breaking quietly on the inside. I know some of you are tired, not just heartbroken. Tired. Tired of being the one who understands. Tired of being the one who forgives. Tired of being the one who has the emotional vocabulary, the insight, the patience, the willingness, the hope. Tired of carrying the maturity for two people. Tired of being told you ask for too much, when what you asked for was consistency, kindness, honesty, reciprocity, repair. Let me tell you this plainly. You are not too much for asking for what should come with love. You are not too much for wanting to feel safe. You are not too much for wanting effort to match words. You are not too much for wanting communication that does not leave you confused. You are not too much for wanting to be considered, cherished, and treated with care. If someone can only keep you by teaching you to want less, that is not love. That is diminishment. And your life is too precious to be lived in diminishment. Your calling is bigger than that. Your peace is holier than that. Your joy is more necessary than that. Some of you have spent years becoming impressive, capable, reliable, attractive, accommodating, high-achieving, emotionally available, strong. But underneath all that performance is a deeper question. Can I be loved without overperforming? Can I be at rest and still be worthy? Can I stop proving and still belong? Can I stop earning and still be enough? And that is where real healing begins, not when you become more desirable, but when you become more honest. When you stop performing wellness and start practicing truth. When you stop curating strength and start allowing tenderness. When you stop trying to look healed and start actually healing. Because peace is not a performance. Wholeness is not branding. Growth is not a costume. Real healing is messy. It is humble. It is repetitive. It is deeply unglamorous some days. It looks like deleting the draft message. It looks like taking the walk instead of making the call. It looks like crying and still keeping the boundary. It looks like going to bed lonely, but not abandoning yourself. It looks like telling a friend, I need help staying away from what hurts me. It looks like choosing the long-term dignity over the short-term relief. And make no mistake, that is courageous work. Courage is not always loud. Sometimes courage is not going back. Sometimes courage is not explaining one more time. Sometimes courage is refusing to turn your pain into a personality. Sometimes courage is building a life so rooted in truth that chaos no longer feels seductive. And then, slowly, something beautiful happens. You begin to rebuild. Not the old version of you. Not the version of you that tolerated breadcrumbs and called it devotion. Not the version of you that made yourself endlessly understandable in hopes of finally being handled with care. No. You rebuild from the ground up. You rebuild your mornings. You rebuild your routines. You rebuild your standards. You rebuild your friendships. You rebuild your relationship with your body. You rebuild your relationship with quiet. You rebuild your relationship with God, or meaning, or hope, or purpose. You rebuild your inner life so that love, the next time it comes, does not arrive to an abandoned home inside you. You become home to yourself. And when that happens, you stop being impressed by almost. You stop being seduced by intensity. You stop mistaking pursuit for integrity. You stop handing the keys of your peace to people who have not demonstrated reverence. Because once you know the cost of losing yourself, you become more intentional about what gets to find you. That is not fear. That is wisdom. That is not jadedness. That is discernment. That is not having walls. That is finally understanding that openness without discernment is not kindness. It is self-neglect. And yes, sometimes the person you detached from will notice the change. They may circle back. They may test the door. They may reappear with nostalgia, charm, confusion, regret, or sudden clarity. And if that happens, I want you to remember this. Missing you is not the same thing as being ready for you. Regret is not repair. Attention is not accountability. A return is not transformation. Do not let your loneliness make promises your healing has not agreed to. Let me say that one slowly. Do not let your loneliness make promises your healing has not agreed to. Because when you have worked hard to come back to yourself, you owe yourself discernment. You owe yourself pacing. You owe yourself evidence. You owe yourself the right to be unconvinced by words without change. And some of you need to hear this with love. Closure is not always a conversation. Sometimes closure is the boundary. Sometimes closure is the distance. Sometimes closure is the moment your life becomes too honest to continue participating in your own harm. That is enough. More than enough. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a version of peace that only arrives after you stop fighting reality, after you stop trying to get a yes from people whose lives are built on maybe, after you stop trying to force mutuality where there is appetite without responsibility, after you stop trying to build intimacy with someone who only shows up when access is easy. Peace begins when the war inside you ends. When you stop splitting yourself between what you know and what you hope. When you stop arguing with your own intuition. When you stop treating red flags like riddles. When you stop volunteering for confusion. And then one day you wake up and the absence does not ache the same. One day your phone becomes just a phone again. One day the song plays and it does not undo you. One day you pass the place, remember the memory, and keep breathing. One day you realize you have gone hours, then days, without centering your life around what they did or did not do. That is healing. Quiet, unannounced, real. And from that place, you begin to understand something profound. The goal was never to become the one they regret losing. The goal was to become the one you never lose again. That is the win. Not being chased, not being missed, not being finally appreciated by the person who could not hold what they had. The win is self-return. The win is congruence. The win is living in such a way that your peace is no longer up for negotiation. The win is being able to look in the mirror and say, I did not abandon myself to stay loved. The win is becoming trustworthy to your own soul. So if you are in that in-between season right now, where the grief is still real, where the nights are still long, where the temptation to reach back is still strong, where the healing feels slower than you hoped, I want to leave you with this. You are not behind. You are not broken beyond repair. You are not weak because this hurts. You are not foolish because you loved hard. You are not hard to love because someone mishandled your heart. You are learning. You are remembering. You are returning. And every day you choose truth over fantasy, peace over performance, boundaries over breadcrumbs, and self-respect over self-betrayal. You are building a life that can hold real love when it comes. A love that does not ask you to shrink. A love that does not confuse you for intimacy. A love that does not require your nervous system to stay in emergency mode. A love that honors your tenderness instead of exploiting it. A love that feels like steadiness, not suspense. A love that has room for your full humanity. A love that does not make you earn what should be given with care. But even before that love arrives, and hear me when I say this, even before that love arrives, you are already worthy. Worthy in the quiet, worthy in the grief, worthy in the rebuilding, worthy when nobody is clapping, worthy when you are choosing yourself with shaking hands, worthy when the only brave thing you did today was not go back. That counts. It all counts. So let them misunderstand your distance if they need to. Let them call your boundary pride if they need to. Let them be unsettled by your silence if they need to. Your job is not to keep being digestible to people who only liked you most when you were overgiving and underprotected. Your job is to come home to yourself, to your body, to your voice, to your dignity, to your peace, to your God-given worth, to the parts of you that have been waiting patiently for you to stop handing your life away in exchange for crumbs. Come home. Come home to the woman who no longer has to chase clarity. Come home to the person who trusts what they feel. Come home to the soul that knows love should not cost this much. Come home to the life that is waiting on the other side of over-explaining. Come home to the peace that begins the moment you stop bargaining with your own value. And if nobody told you this before, let me tell you now. You are allowed to outgrow what once felt important. You are allowed to release what you once prayed would work. You are allowed to stop carrying what is crushing you. You are allowed to choose a life that feels like breathing. You are allowed to become unavailable for confusion. You are allowed to be done. You are allowed to heal. You are allowed to be free. And when you finally understand that, not just in your mind, but in your bones, you become dangerous to anything built on your self-abandonment. Because now your peace has standards. Now your love has discernment. Now your softness has structure. Now your kindness has boundaries. Now your presence is rooted, not restless. Now your life belongs to you again. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you remember nothing else, remember this. Detachment is not the end of your capacity to love. It is the end of your willingness to love in ways that require you to disappear. And that is not loss. That is liberation. That is courage. That is healing. That is the moment the story changes. And that finally is the moment you choose yourself and mean it.